One is connected to YouTube. I think I'm going to play the opening video. Am I right? Okay.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Ronnie.
You're welcome. Okay, we are ready.
UINSPIRE Alliance is a network of youth and young professionals working in science, engineering, technology, and innovation.
UINSPIRE Alliance provides the platform for youth and young professionals to connect, engage, and learn from other youth and experts in the region.
We are not only at the international conferences or at the laboratories. UINSPIRE is working together with the local community in the field.
To participate in decision making, demonstrating their ability for advocacy, communication and consultation, as well as leveraging advanced technology.
We strongly believe that inclusivity is the integral factor of the DRR. Hence, all our work and projects are people-centric and from the communities on the ground.
We are committed to supporting youth leadership We are happy to work with the UINSPIRE Alliance.
UINSPIRE Alliance bridges the gap between professionals and young specialists and make it possible to exchange knowledge and experience between Asian countries to make them more resilient.
We work with youth and the young professionals from the academe and the industry sectors to build back better in a post-pandemic world.
UINSPIRE has connected us and bring us together to contribute for disaster risk reduction and climate change by utilizing science, engineering, technology, and innovation.
All right. Hello and greeting to everyone. Welcome to our Choco Talk on DRR Chapter 9. Comfortable with the name itself, do not forget to grab your hot chocolate drink, or if you need something to cool you down, adding some ice cube will be nice too. Because of today's webinar, we're going to talk about the two dimensions of climate change impact, which are the past and the present. So today's webinar topic will be disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in heritage sites. And me, Nur Zaham from UINSPIRE Malaysia, will be your moderator for the whole 1 hour session. Interestingly, for today's session, we have two speakers who are both actively involved in research and projects in integrating disaster risk reduction with heritage site preservation, either locally or internationally. Without further delay, let me introduce to you our first speaker, Dr. Ripal Kanji from UINSPIRE India. He is the founding member of the National Platform of Youth and Young Professionals YYPs of India working in disaster risk management and climate action, known as the Confederation of Risk Reduction Professionals, CRRP. He is also a cultural first aider with ICROM and cultural heritage steward trainer under the Smithsonian Institution's leadership course. Today, he will be presenting on the topic of contemporary discourse of disaster risk management, climate action, and cultural heritage. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ripal to begin with his presentation. To Dr. Ripal, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's actually very exciting to be here amongst all of you and share a little bit of my experiences on cultural heritage, disaster risk management, and of course, climate change and climate action. Well, to begin with, I would like to confess that I really feel that I am a little bit of a misfit in this entire thing because I come from a
Dr. Ripal, I think your sound is breaking.
is it
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So I guess I feel like a little bit of a misfit here because I come from a background of computer science, and cultural heritage culture usually is understood to be dealt by architects, by conservationists, or such allied fields basically. But then I have certain bit of experiences with cultural heritage culture and the intersection of it with disaster risk management and climate change. So I will take this opportunity to share my experiences on that. So to begin with, what I would like to do is to show you this particular picture, which of course many of you have already seen. This is basically the stripes representing the temperature change that the Earth has gone through over a period of time, depicting till 2019. So this is how climate change has been experienced by us, and we all know this. Now, how has this happened? If we are to believe the general understanding that greenhouse gas emissions have led to global warming, and a long-term effect of global warming has resulted in climate variability and climate change, then we need to understand that what has led to the emissions of those greenhouse gases. Now, this was a study which was done by the World Resource Institute, and it very clearly depicts that most of the contribution comes from the consumption of energy or the production of energy and how it is being consumed at residential buildings, commercial buildings, transportation, etc. And you all basically can see what is going on. So this is not new to us, right? Now let us come to the definition of culture by UNESCO. There are a plethora of definitions available to all of us, but let us take the one which is standard, and try to understand what it says. So UNESCO defines culture as a set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or a social group that encompasses not only art and literature, but lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. Now, I have particularly highlighted some of the key words which I feel is very, very interesting. And you need to understand this definition and the relation of this definition in context of climate change. Now, the definition very clearly states that it is basically an amalgamation of lifestyle, the ways of life, the value systems, the traditions and beliefs, which collectively leads to something which I have represented as Delta culture. Because of my engineering background, I tend to express things mathematically. So Delta culture is something which is not stagnant, but it is evolving, right? So if you take a look back on almost a century behind us, you would see how our way of life, how our lifestyles, how our value systems, how our modes of transportation, how our patterns of energy consumption has changed over the time. And that has a lot to do with how we live our life, our daily life, basically, right? So on one hand, you would probably be thinking that this is what constructs our culture, and it's Delta culture because it's evolving. But to some, it may also appear that it is eroding, right? So our ways of life, which were there with us centuries before, are more sustainable in a way. That is a belief system that many people hold, and they say that the life that we are living now is basically an erosion of culture, while some of us, like me, we believe that this is a culture that this had to happen, this process of evolution, and this is evolving. Now, this is a very interesting thing that I want to share with all of you, that our belief systems also change. Belief system, which is a very crucial element of what constitutes our culture, also changes. Now, this is a picture which depicts the first revolution of Indian independence, which started in 1857. And very simply, the reason, out of many reasons, one of the main reasons is that a particular regiment of soldiers, they did not want to go to Burma, which is the present-day Myanmar, to fight a war for the Britishers. As simple as that. That was the belief system. And why? Because at that point of time, the contemporary understanding is that when you cross seas, you lose your religion, you lose your caste, right? So that was the belief system back then in 1857. The ways of life were completely different. So this is just an example. Compare this with what we have now. Our belief systems have completely changed. Our ways of life have completely changed. There was once a time when crossing seas was considered to be a problem, a huge problem, because one was supposed to lose their religion if they do so. And now, when we talk about traveling, the first thing that comes to our mind is basically air travel, and that constitutes a huge amount towards what we are seeing in terms of climate variability and climate change. So this was an example that I wanted to share with all of you, showing that culture and the elements which constitute culture, they are either evolving or eroding the way you want to interpret it, but it is always changing, it's constantly changing. So this is one thing that I wanted to show to all of you. Now, when we accept this idea that our ways of life have eventually forced us to live in a condition where we are threatened by risks posed by climate change, we also have to acknowledge that there are solutions, there are approaches, there are methodologies in our culture, in our ways of life, in our indigenous knowledge, in our erstwhile practices that can actually help us to strive towards more sustainable development, right? So now, when we have realized the holistic impact of what climate change is, we are looking back at greener approaches. We are talking about nature-based solutions. We are talking about ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, right? We are trying to amend our ways of life. There was a time when air travel was not a big deal, but now even the United Nations organization, they are cutting down on their air travels. Why? Because carbon accounting, footprint, offsetting has become a thing. We are now relying on indigenous knowledge and traditional practices. For example, if I'm to talk about India, there's this concept of water wells in parts of India where there have been incidents of long drawn droughts, right? So now we are trying to revive those things. So while our ways of life, which has been changing and leading us to what we are facing now, we are also looking back and trying to figure out, are there ways in our past that can actually help us? I will give you more contemporary examples, which will prove my point further. For example, from Philippines in Cordillera, this particular indigenous group declares something which is called the Ubaya, which actually means quarantine. So when back in 2020, when the world was hit by pandemic and we were all locked down through different quarantine measures by our governments, for many of us, it would probably have been the first time that was happening to us, because I am not assuming that most of us were living in the last pandemic when it happened in 1917 or 1918. So this was probably the first time that we experienced it. But for this particular indigenous group from Philippines, they actually were aware of these things, this processes of how to quarantine. This basically was a part of the process, and they did not have to face much of difficulties which we, more urbanized versions of our communities, had to face, right? Again, there are other examples also from Japan. We all are aware of tsunami stones, which very, very clearly depicts that houses are to be constructed below this, above this point, because we have recorded tsunami waves at this particular point. So these are early warnings in a way. When we talk about in the vernacular of disaster risk management, these are early warnings. These are elements of preparedness for you. But what happens is that due to the advancement of technology and our mad pursuit towards using technology, we somewhere have lost this respect for the indigenous knowledge, this traditional practices that we have, and we have tended to ignore it. But now somehow we are again, kind of bringing everything back together and trying to figure out, is there a common solution for us where we can actually balance the technological advancements with what we already know through our ways of life, through our practices, through whatnot. So this was another example that I wanted to share with all of you. So what are the points to think? The point to think is that our ways of life, culture as a whole, has led us to where we are. And we need to revisit that particular past for a sustainable future, as I already explained. Now, accelerate the process of evolution. The thing is that culture is evolving, right? We understand that it's evolving. Our ways of life are evolving. We have been leading a particular tenor of life in the past. We are evolving to a new tenor maybe, but we need to develop a culture because it's already changing. We need to develop a culture which fosters sustainable development, which fosters resilience. We need to strike a balance between the technological advancements that we have. We need to strike a balance between the use of data analytics, big data. We need to strike a balance with the knowledge that we already have, right? And we need to understand that culture, as we speak, should not be talked about with divisive inclinations. There is no religion, there is no caste, there is no race that separates our culture. That's a very different and narrowed perspective towards culture, which we need to, kind of shed off if we need to build a culture towards building resilience. So that's important. Another point to think here is that since our ways of life have kind of accelerated climate variability and climate change, which has led to the increased frequency and intensity of hazards, specifically hydrometeorological, and which has also led to increased vulnerabilities of exposed assets. And when I say assets, I mean infrastructure, communities, economy, because of the connectedness. Climate change is referred to as the amplifier of disaster risk. Now, what do we do about it? How do we go about it? We need to understand that climate change has happened due to our inaction. Now, this has led to the increase in the frequency and intensity of hazards. Our uninformed or ill-informed planning has led to the increase in our exposures of communities of our infrastructure, and our lack of understanding, our ignorance, or simply not being interested has led to the increase in our vulnerabilities, right? So in every aspect of disaster risk, if you look at disaster risk being a composite of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, in every aspect, somehow we understand that there is human intervention. In case of hazards, in case of increased exposure, in case of increased vulnerabilities. And really, we have not done much in terms of increasing capacity. We are doing a lot, but still a lot needs to be done, right? And yet, after all of this, when a risk is realized and a disaster happens, right? We blame nature for it. Now, this is another thing that we need to change when we are talking about evolving culture. We need to build a culture where we understand that we are responsible for our actions. Disasters are not natural or human-induced. It's basically human-induced. Hazards are natural. And even when you talk about hydrometeorological hazard, there is a human intervention behind it, right? So we need to understand that, and we need to build this culture, because this is very important. Until and unless we realize that we are facing the effects and impacts of what we have done in the past, we will not be ready to kind of rectify it and move towards a more resilient and sustainable future. So when we are talking about culture, we are talking about our ways of life, we are talking about our belief systems. We need to incorporate this idea within our belief systems that we are responsible for what is happening, and we need to take action. We are doing it, but we need to take more concrete actions in that regard. So this was one thing that I wanted to kind of touch upon when I was discussing about culture. The next thing that I want to focus on is on the term cultural heritage. Again, going back to how UNESCO explains it, it is, in the broadest sense, is a product and a process which provides societies with a wealth of resources that are inherited from the past, created in the present, and bestowed for the benefit of future generations, right? Now, if you think about it very broadly, you will understand that there are so many things to it. But what is the problem? And the problem is that the understanding of those who are in power, for example, the policymakers or the decision makers, their understanding of cultural heritage is limited to physical heritage only. That is, for example, monuments, sites, and precincts. Another thing is that the interpretation is quite divisive in nature, right? It has religious intonations to it. It can be seen in terms of caste divisiveness, and also different races also. These are the general perceptions that I have experienced in my career when I tend to work with different types of policymakers at different levels. And the third problem is of ownership. When we talk about cultural heritage in terms of physical cultural heritage, sites and precincts, the problem is of ownership, right? In all of our countries, you might have noticed that there are certain sites or certain monuments which are preserved, which are to be conserved by the national government. But if you are in a federal system of governance, you would understand that there are certain sites and monuments which are under the jurisdiction of the national government, some are with the state government, and some are just cultural heritage for that particular community itself. There are no laws which protects those kind of heritage. When you are talking about a site and a precinct which is under the jurisdiction of the national government, of course, there are laws for it. People are actually working to protect it, preserve it, conserve it. When you're talking about monuments in a federal setup, if it's owned by the state, then the state is also doing something towards it. They have some legislation, they have some rules for it. But there are also sites and precincts which are owned by the community. They are nothing less than a cultural heritage for them, but there are no laws, there are no regulations for them. So these are the basic, very basic 3 problems that I have personally experienced when I talk about cultural heritage. So I would cite you or walk you through an example that I am currently working on. It's in the state that I work in India. It's the name of this particular village is Bela, and it had to suffer a huge blow back in 2001 when there was an earthquake here, and almost 13,805 people across the state died due to the earthquake. So this is the site when you enter the particular village, Bela, right? It's nothing less than a known or a recognized cultural heritage. It's as good as that. So this is the particular setup. This is the community. These are the houses, and this is how the community is. This is how they interact. This is how they live. Now, can you see the small cracks? Now, these cracks are the gifts of the 2001 earthquake. Now, this has been taken last year in 2021. So even after 20 years, these particular cracks are quite visible, even after 20 years. Now, this is what is left of some of the part of the fort in this particular village. And really nothing has been done to kind of reconstruct it, to recover the entire thing in this particular village. Why? The reasons are the same. Who is the owner of this place, right? It's not the national government, because this is not a recognized site. It's not of the state government, the federal or the provincial government, because it's again not recognized by the state government. It's basically owned by the community, and for them, it is their way of life, right? But there's no regulation, no legislation which can be enforced, which can be enacted, and these things can be recovered again. There are no tools for that. So what is the problem here? In this particular case, the problem is threefold. As I said, it's not a priority. Why? Because there are no rules, no legislations which kind of protect this particular place, these sites, these things. And because this is not a priority, because this is not protected in a way by legislation, resources are not available. No one can allocate resource. For example, if you talk about legislation, the responsibility comes to a particular department, and then the department can mandate a particular budget which goes for the recovery of this area. But there is no such thing. So resources are not available. Second is, let's talk about recovery. Let's talk about recovery in a sense that let's try to think who can reconstruct this particular area. Are there masons who are trained enough? Are there artisans who are trained enough? Maybe not, perhaps not. And how? If you need to reconstruct this entire thing, those coming from the background of cultural heritage would understand that documentation pre-disaster is very, very important. What do you reconstruct it to? You don't have the particular buildings, the particular nuances documented well enough. So how do you reconstruct? Who does it? No one is trained enough. And who gets you the fund? Who gets you the manpower to do it? So these are the problems. So now what we did is that we tried to solve it bottom up. We, as I was saying, we need to balance technology and cultural heritage aspects. So this is where we brought in automatic recording systems, LIDAR, light detection and ranging, and we brought in a team paired up with different universities from across the world, and we paired up, formed a team, and we started documenting it. So we use different types of documenting instruments like drones, we use LIDAR, and these are the things that we came up with. Now, the interesting thing is that we did not do it on our own. We can be said to be the experts of this, but we did not do it. We went to the village, we talked to the community and said that, see, this, when you recover it, when you reconstruct all of your forts, all of your places, probably this will become a site for visitors to come in. And therein you will be able to kind of boost your economy, right? So this is the first part, economic aspect. The second part is that you will also feel good about it, right? Because these are those places where you have spent much of your childhood. You have so strong memories around it. So don't you think that you would be interested in reconstructing it? This is how, over a period of time, we tried to engage with people in that particular village, and they eventually got interested. So we gathered a group of students from a university in Gujarat. We went there, we talked to the people, we trained them to use LiDAR, we trained them to use drones, and they came up with wonderful imageries, right? And if anyone has gone through how LiDAR works, you would understand that the nuances that it captures is incredible, right? So this is how the entire imagery was produced, and it was shown to the villages, to the community people. And very interesting things were pointed out. For example, see, this is the entire layout of your area. So if you need to plan for an evacuation route, this is how you do it. Now see, this is the 3D image of your building. These are the cracks. So if there is an earthquake next time, these are the cracks which are going to give away, and your building will probably fall down. So do something about it. So in this process, we were empowering the communities to use technology. That's the first thing. We were making them more involved, more engaged, and making them realize that their cultural heritage has some sort of a value which they can encash. If this all becomes correct, people will be interested in visiting them, and that will become a prospect, a very good prospect for them, right? So this is how we started doing it. And then we thought that this probably would be an engagement at the level of the community and the university and maybe my organization, which is although government, but still will not be able to kind of convince the policymakers or decision makers that this is something that you need to do. Bela is not only a single case. There are many such cases around Gujarat, that is my state, and you can take up this kind of projects all over. So you need to do something of a policy intervention. So we started working on a policy brief. This is something that we are doing right now. We are working on a policy brief, and it would be as crisp as just letting the decision makers, those who are in power, those who are in authority, to let them know that, see, this is how this can be done. This is very easy, and these are the advantages that you would gain. And for if you're worried about funds, these are the ways you can actually take care of the funding also. So now, right now we are working on the policy brief, and maybe by April we will be able to come up with the policy brief and would be presenting to the government here, and hopefully that would be accepted. And if that happens, that would again be a huge success for us, who wants to blend the two different very two different fields together, bringing in technology, bringing the communities together, and talking about risk-informed sustainable development. So these are my final points. Cultural heritage, we need to broaden our horizon of understanding. It's not just sites, precincts, monuments, it's much more than that. It's our ways of life, it's our belief system, which actually is changing. It's Delta culture, which is evolving. Now, some of us may think of it as erosion. Some of us may think of it as evolution. That's up to us. But the point is that when it's actually changing, we must make an effort to develop a culture which talks about resilience, which talks about risk-informed sustainable development, right? Usually we talk about disaster risk management of cultural heritage, of sites, of communities, of precincts, of monuments. Let's also talk about cultural heritage for disaster risk management, for climate action. There's a lot of knowledge stored in our ways of life, in our belief systems. We just need to go back, take a look, and vet it with the technological advancement, the scientific evidences that we already have, and then create something which I call culture for resilience, right? So these were the points that I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your patience, and over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Dr. Ripa, for a very comprehensive presentation. It's very interesting when you say that all this time we are thinking about disaster risk management for the cultural heritage, but now it's time for us to think about cultural heritage for the disaster risk management, which is now I can see the link between these two and the needs on the culture for resilience. Okay, thank you for that. We will go for the question later on. So now we're moving forward for our last presenter for today, Ms. Yuniarti Diaz, representing UINSPIRE Indonesia and Defense Heritage Society. Ms. Yuniarti compiled with an extensive educational background and is also one of the founders of UINSPIRE. She has been working with various reputable DRR organizations, including UN agencies, WHO, UNESCO, and UNDP. Today, she will be presenting on the topic of preserving heritage sites against disasters, a case study in the urban city of Jakarta, Indonesia. This presentation has been presented during the 16th Association Pacific of Pacific Rim Universities in 2021. So for those who have missed the conference, this will be your golden time. With that, to Ms. Yuniarti, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Noor. I will share my screen. Can you confirm if you can see? So basically, this presentation has been presented during the 16th Association of Pacific Rim University last year. And this is a result of my collaboration with a researcher, Dr. Jane Francois, from Department of International Relations, President University and Defense Heritage Society. And this research is actually what we're currently doing is now we're developing a project and involving several of university students. And this presentation will provide you some information and insight about what really happened in the terms of heritage site, preserving heritage site against disaster in the context of urban city, Jakarta. And then this is just an outlook about DKI Jakarta in Indonesia for those who have not yet visited Jakarta or maybe new for Jakarta. Jakarta is capital city of Indonesia, which will be right now, we will move to Kalimantan, Hanif, soon. So Jakarta is very known for many disaster events that happened, and mostly the disaster that happened in Jakarta, either flood or fire. So the fact that Jakarta is prone to flood because we actually surrounded by 13 rivers. And also another cause why the Jakarta is also prone to multi-disaster because of the highest number of population across the regions itself. And then this is just a disaster plan in the Jakarta when I mentioned that we have like two high frequent disaster type in this city or this province. First, we have the fire. If you look into the statistic, this is I took from the Jakarta statistic, is that the fire incident mostly reported in South, East, and North Jakarta. And some of these fire incidents also affecting several heritage sites in Jakarta. For instance, the Jakarta Maritime Museum or Museum Bahari that were affected by the fire in 2018. And the cause of the fire itself, mostly because of the short circuit, and then also follow with other causes, for instance, like waste burning, cigarette, and other. And then we also need to look again the cause of the flood in Jakarta. When I mentioned that we are surrounded by 13 rivers across the regencies. Not just because of the there are many rivers across this city, but also because of the high intensity rainfall that often affected as well. So some of the flood event itself is also affecting several of the cultural heritage in Jakarta, like for instance the National Museum, the Old Town City, Jakarta, that in which the event happened in 2007 and 2010. And then if we look again, based on the statistic itself, that most of the prone area in Jakarta that high affected by the flood itself will be in South East and West Jakarta. So we also need to see from two of these hazard and disaster event that affecting the cultural heritage. We also need to look and realize that Jakarta has a lot of cultural heritage. We have around like 168 cultural heritage that were spread across the 5 regencies and 1 island, the Thousand Island. And from this number, most of the heritage sites are located in central Jakarta, West and North Jakarta. And most of the heritage sites are in the form of building or construction. So if we look again, the previous explanation that I mentioned to you based on the statistic about the number of flood and also fire event, North Jakarta is one of the regions in Jakarta that actually prone of this both disaster event. And also learning from that risk and also compare with the previous historical event that, for instance, in case of the flood event that affecting the old town of Kota Tua, it caused a lot of great financial loss to Jakarta, which nearly $250,000. And it's also affecting the reduction of tourist visit and then also the revenue for the city. Now, this is just a reminder for us as a disaster practitioner and researcher that cultural heritage is also part of the priority action of the Sendai Framework for Action, especially in priority 1, understanding disaster risk, and then the other one will be priority 3, investing DRR for resilience. So in this case, that we really need to have more attention on the cultural heritage side, and then how to actually integrate the approach of DRR into the cultural heritage. And then this is just an analysis that was done by my colleague and I, in which we try to look and then also identify the level of heritage in danger in Jakarta. So we put 4 levels, 1 until 4, in which 1 will be like the most severe, and then 4 will be like the less severe. And then also the example of the heritage in each of the sites that will need attention from not just from the government, but also from the multi-stakeholder in the area. And then if you see that most of the heritage in level 1 and then level T and up until level 3, most of the heritage are located in North Jakarta. Like I mentioned to you that we have a lot of number of flood and fire in North Jakarta. We have a number of cultural heritage in North Jakarta. So from this analysis itself, it shows that we really need to have, for the Jakarta government, need to have and more pay attention of those heritage sites that are located in North Jakarta because of the high impact from disaster. And then also in here, this is, we use the DRM cycle to explain more of the current situation, what happened before, during, and after disaster in the context of cultural heritage preservation in Jakarta. So if you see in pre-disaster that actually in terms of risk assessment, there are several studies that have been done so far. Although most of these studies actually are not widely published yet. So not all people or public know exactly what's happening in the context of the risk assessment of the heritage site. And then also for the risk prevention and mitigation, there are actually several number of efforts that have been done to revitalize the cultural heritage. And also there are several policies that are already issued by the Jakarta government. And then for emergency preparedness, we see that, for instance, in several museums, there are adequate equipment, but somehow these equipment are only fit or only can be used for like one single type of disaster. So if you have, for instance, like a heritage site that actually have like an enormous number of risks, flood, fire, and earthquake. So you have really to think to providing more equipment and tools to be that can be used to face that kind of situation. And then also for during disaster for emergency response, in most of the heritage sites in Jakarta, there is no SOP or clear guideline who actually responsible in case of emergency. So what will be like the emergency command system, and then also there's no adequate training that are provided for the staff itself. For instance, I will share the lesson from the Jakarta Maritime Museum that affected by the fire in 2019. So when the fire happened, nobody's actually can take action because they don't know what to do. They don't know who actually in charge. And then also because the fire happened so quickly. So most of the, I think it's like 60-70% of the museum maritime are burned out from the fire. And then for the post-disaster, the current situation is that we really need for the Jakarta government to have like official that are well trained to do like damage assessment, but in the more context of the cultural and heritage, those who actually have more knowledge and experience. Maybe if like the government don't have that kind of skilled personnel or staff, they can actually try to look for some assistance from the university, because usually university they have their own major that studies on that. And then for the treatment, most of the building that affected disaster will actually take a lot of time and take to be repaired. And also current situation is that we don't have that kind expert or specialist in context of curator, engineer, and building expert in heritage preservation. It's very rare. And then for recovery rehabilitation, most of the challenge will be in the budget, because I also experience when there are a lot of there's flood, there's fire happening in Jakarta, and then a lot of the building or heritage owner or the government actually asking and requesting for fund. We don't have that kind of fund available, and it will take a lot of funding, because you really need to have like a special approach to recover or rehabilitate the damages of the building. So this is this example what kind of heritage project that have been implemented so far in Jakarta. For instance, we have the revitalizing of the Kota Tua Jakarta Museum that was done by UNESCO. So they do some analytical study of Kota Tua, developing conservation best practice and sharing knowledge, provide expertise, funding, capacity building, house call, and also heritage clinic for the building owner. So this is very important to have this kind of project and an approach that can actually be implemented for longer term and to ensure the sustainability. As per today, I heard that Jakarta just announced like 14 new cultural heritage sites. When there is like a new cultural heritage, meaning that those building or sites that the age beyond 50 years, then it can be stated or declared as heritage site. But despite the fact that Jakarta government adding more number of cultural heritage, they should also think about the integration of the risk reduction approach, and then how to ensure that this cultural heritage that they now or newly announced can actually be protected and preserved in the future in facing of the threat or existing disaster or existing hazard. And then we also can take the lesson learned from other region and country. For instance, like the old town Semarang or Kota Tua Semarang, And also in Yogyakarta, they already have or developed like disaster risk reduction strategic planning that they put into like regulation, and then they also put and provide several activities or programs that ensure that those heritage sites in their area are well preserved and can be more resilient toward disaster. And then also from other countries, for instance, like Italy and Netherlands, they already have like those policies, training, and then also awareness, as well like multi-stakeholder or collaboration approach to ensuring that those heritage sites are well maintained and then also preserved. And then also this is just a quick recommendation that we provide, is that it's really important to have like in strengthening the intersectoral collaboration between different stakeholders, because this is not just one man job. This is not just the responsibility of the Jakarta government, but also you really need to involve, for instance, like the Association of Museum. You really need to involve all the practitioners, the architect, the curator, and then also researcher in the context of ensuring that all these heritage sites have their own DRR planning, and then that there will be like better and prepare staff or capacity building that can actually put in place. And then also we also need to have more research that can available and accessible to be understood by the public, that can also raising the public awareness. What will be like the current situation? What will they need to anticipate in the future? And then also having like specific data set related with cultural heritage, because I tried to look into Inaris BNPB. We have those what you call it, scenario for risk, for disaster. We can actually look and layering different hazard with cultural heritage data, but apparently it's still those kind of data are still like out there. And then also capacity building, I mentioned to you also that we also need capacity building, proper training for the building owner, for the staff of the museum, etc. And then also the urgency to start digitalization of cultural heritage in at most disaster-prone area. For instance, like if we are facing the probability of having like maybe like mega tsunami, or maybe like earthquake, major earthquake, where actually it will be threatened the heritage site in the area to be collapsed. At least we can have those kind of digitalization that can actually replicate and can be put in the historical memory or recording. And also a quick we also have defense heritage organization that you can visit, since this is a collaboration with different heritage societies. So you can also look our other work and program in other areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Yuniati, for such an inspiring presentation on urban heritage preservation, which is very relatable with the current climate situation and the mass rapid development. I could say that it's a common problems when we talk about the heritage preservation and climate change. Definitely, heritage will receive the most severe impact because they're already vulnerable and they already been exposed more to the impacts by the climate change. And also, I agreed on the say that we need to start on the digitalization preservation, because even there are statements by the UNESCO that they say not every heritage sites or heritage building can be safe due to this climate change. So we have to think other ways on how to preserve and to conserve, maybe through visualization, so that we still can deliver these memories or this knowledge to our future generation. Because as we can see, we have a lot of types natural hazards, and we can't control when it comes and how does it will impact to the heritage site itself. So thank you again, Miss Uni. So now, I believe we have a lot of questions in the chat box right now. So we shall move for the Q&A session, starting with the first question to Dr. Ripal. I see there a question from Ari. So the question would be, how or what do you suggest on the idea of today's lifestyle would be the next future culture as heritage?
Wow. Thank you for the question. Yes, definitely. The lifestyle that we have today defines the part of a culture that we have now, and it will also define the culture that would probably be referred to as a heritage in the times to come. To give you a very small example, recently UNESCO recognized this religious festival in India, in a specific part in India, West Bengal, where we worship Mother Goddess as an intangible cultural heritage, which adds a lot of value to human sentiments and human communities. Now, the thing is that the entire scenario around that particular celebration, as it is right now, was not the same if we are to look at it, let's say around 50 years back or even 100 years back. It was not the same. As time progressed, the vibrancy in terms of the investments that go into that particular thing, into that particular celebration, has gone up like multifolds, right? So it's not just about getting recognized for that particular event or that particular celebration. It has been going on for years together. It has evolved. It has become grander every year, and we expect it to become more grand, if not hindered by the pandemic. So the way we celebrate it will keep on changing, and this has happened. So whether it would become a heritage recognized or not, that is something very else, and I am not very fit to answer that. But yes, ideally, that thing will become a culture. Yes, I do agree to that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ripal, for the answers. Okay, then we have a question to our Miss Uni from IFA. There's a comparison on lesson learned between few places in Indonesia, Italy, and Netherlands. May I know, are there particular reasons why choose those two places to be compared with Jogja, Central Java, and Aceh?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, the reason why we choose Netherlands is that if you look the the geographical setting of the DKI of Jakarta, that actually prone to flood, and then they have like more or less similarity with the Netherlands, and then also that's why we try to look into the other case in Netherlands, how the heritage site in that country can actually being adapted or applied to Jakarta context. And then also for Italy, because in the terms of Italy have a lot of heritage site, and then also Italy is also major to earthquake as well with the fire, and they already have a very good strong system, policy and program that put in place. And then also it will be interesting to learn more from Italy, because based on my experience when I was working with UNESCO, we have those kind of experts that come from Netherlands to Jakarta. We do have the UNESCO also have experts from Italy that assist the building, but at the time it's not specific for the heritage site. So it will be interesting to learn more from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Yuni. Okay, now we have question from Dr. Rahma to both our speakers. Maybe you can decide who wants to answer first. Do you feel the most challenges from YYPs in conducting activities related on DRR in climate change adaptation in heritage sites? Who wants to go first? Maybe Dr. Paul?
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you, Dr. Rama, for the question. It's actually a very pertinent question. From my personal experiences, what I would feel is that lack of orientation and lack of the understanding that this is basically a transdisciplinary field. I will give you an example. When we talk about adaptation to climate change in case of cultural heritage sites, we generally tend to bring in experts from the domain of material scientists. We bring in architects who are very well versed with how to deal with the adaptations to that particular specific site that is understood, right? But you would also know that there is a requirement for UNESCO for such heritage sites to kind of have a disaster management plan or a site management plan. Now, our understanding, we coming from a field of disaster risk management, we have a completely different understanding of how a disaster risk management plan should be prepared. But those who are actually involved in the adaptation practices or mitigation practices, they have not a very detailed idea, but a very superficial idea of how it's to be done. So they do it. On the other hand, if we change the table and bring in disaster risk management professionals to deal with the problem, they have no idea about cultural heritage. They have no idea about how important the sites and precincts are. They have very limited idea of how the livelihoods have cropped up around those sites and precincts. So we have never really, kind of oriented our youth and young professionals to understand that this is very transdisciplinary. You will never be able to do everything on your own. You will have to talk to a cultural heritage expert. You will have to talk to a material scientist in order to make a plan which is very, very robust, which is very, very resilient and very, very climate sensitive. And this is where I think UINSPIRE Alliance as a whole, CRRP, UINSPIRE Indonesia, we are actually the platforms. We need to do this. And we are doing it. So, yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ripal. Maybe Ms. Yeni?
Yes, Dr. Ahmad, thank you for the question. So I think I also agree with Dr. Ripal, because when we're talking about the cultural heritage, we really need to look into like different multidisciplinary. You have the architect, you have the archaeologist, you have the civil engineer. But then again, for the young professional and youth out there, sometimes when they see like cultural heritage, it's just like an old building, empty building, without them knowing the historical background of that heritage itself. So I think it's very important to also bring back the story why actually this heritage site exists. I mean, like if we put in a storytelling that can actually attract more people to learn and then also to contribute more, that will be actually attract their attention. And also because currently the research and then also the presentation that I was show you earlier, we're actually trying to involve more of the university students from President University as well from the University of Indonesia, and then also to teach and also training them to have like understanding and better awareness and knowledge in the preserving heritage site. So that will be probably like the challenge, but I think if we put into like a very good packaging, like storytelling, I think there will be like more youth and young practitioners that will put their time and effort to it. Thank you.
Thank you for the answers, Ms. Yuni. Okay, then maybe I can ask my own question to both the speakers, because this is personally very related to my recent studies for my PhD. Because when we are talking about heritage, cultural heritage, conservation, preservation, most of the researcher, of the people are thinking about the buildings, how to preserve, how to conserve a building. But when we are talking about heritage sites, it could be a cities, it could be a bigger sizes of area. And the process to preserve the heritage sites will be more complex compared to your focusing only on particular buildings. So with the triggering hazards like floodings, you cannot find a best way to compound or to secure the whole sites because it's exposed, because it's within the community, it's within the populations. So how do you think the best management plan to be established or to be drafted in order to protect this heritage site from the climate change impact, maybe like flooding or and some things in terms of heritage sites? Maybe who wants to go first? Mbak Yeni?
Me? Okay, so yeah, I think I will just like share my experience here with Yogyakarta with the Borobudur, and then also in Lombok there's also like a traditional house. I forgot the name of it. So in those rural area, you have the community are very well known to working together. So I mean, if we do or we use the approach of the community base, it will make our work easier. For instance, in the context of Borobudur, because Yogyakarta, one of the hazard will be on volcano eruption. So if there is if they receive like some sort of alert warning from the government, that there will be like increasing of the warning, and then there will be ashes from the volcano. They will work together, I mean, to cover with the plastic the entire surrounding of those sites in context of Borobudur temple. Yeah, in the context of there is a Lombok like traditional houses. It's an old ancient houses or compound. So when there was earthquake happened in 2018, and then like it causing several of the houses collapse and damage. So the community will actually working but with their group, with the youth, and then also with the community leader to ensuring like cleaning up the debris, and then also making sure that the other building or the other ancient houses, they will put like with a block to ensure that it won't collapse anytime soon. So it's also important, yeah, to have that kind of community awareness and then also ownership to the heritage site, because in Jakarta you also have several of the let's say school, elementary school that actually, because of its age beyond 50 years, then it's considered as heritage site without like without the school administrative and then like the school community know and understand what they should do to preserving their own school. So we really need to have that kind of building awareness of the community, building ownership, and then also as well building the capacity so the community will able to also contribute and protect this heritage with their own capacity and with their own resources.
Thank you, Mbak Yuni. Dr. Paul?
Yes, thank you for the question, and I echo completely with what Ms. Yuni said. I will cite my own examples. So the place where I work, it's basically very near to Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad is a World Heritage City. So when I think about your question and think about my own place of World Heritage City, what comes to my mind is a very, very complex but three-pronged approach. So the first approach is about empowering and orienting the decision makers. Because if you look at the Sendai framework, it talks about 4 priorities, and the second priority is about strengthening disaster risk governance. Now, when you have actually empowered decision makers, you have actually strengthened that particular pillar of action. when the decision makers are interested in the site, in the area, they would actually take up objectives of understanding risk in that area. They would take up actions of how to invest and make it more resilient. And they would also draft different types of plans which will help in better recovery. So that's the first approach. The second approach is, as Ms. Uni was pointing out, you cannot do anything without involving the community. For example, if I talk about Ahmedabad, most of the buildings in the old city are made up of wood. So from the perspective of a disaster risk management professional, if it's wood, fire is a prominent hazard, right? But until and unless you go into that community and talk to the people, you would never know that the wood that is used is of a very, very special kind. On one hand, it has basically humid content within it, which will actually prevent fire. And on the other hand, the wood is so light that it also kind of provides a coolness when it's very warm during the summer months, right? But until and unless you go and talk to the communities or involve them in the process of designing the site management plan, you would never get these kind of insights. So this is the second approach. And the third approach is left to us who are working with the government or as consultants or as researchers to kind of bring all these facts on the surface. Until and unless we do that, it will never be recognized. For example, all of this while the World Heritage City of Ahmedabad was just a cultural heritage site. But with our interventions, what has happened is that we have been able to publish an article with the Global Assessment Report, which is due to come out in 22. And there we talk about the city of Ahmedabad not as a World Heritage Site, but as a place where we have to look for systemic capacities within those communities. So we are trying to bring all of this together. So I think that is how the approach should be. It's not a very single way path, but you have to approach the problem from all the possible directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. So I guess we have the last question that actually relate to your answer just now, which is from ST. She was asking that to what extent is the governance support for the issue of climate change in heritage sites?
Okay.
Maybe Dr. Paul?
Yes, okay. Now you need to understand that for the government working in a country like India, for the government, it's very difficult to work out site-specific climate change action or adaptation plans. It's very difficult for them. But yes, in the larger scope of things, climate action is one of the priorities of the government. There is no doubt about it. But it is also about the responsibility of the decision makers who are working at different levels. Their responsibility is to kind of channelize the entire agenda of the government and implement it into these kind of local sites. The national government for the entire of India, the person cannot plan for a small site. That has to be done by the person who is sitting at the province or the state. So his responsibility is to kind of implement those ideas into plans and do it for the site. And therein, where youth and young professionals come in, we will always have to be vocal about the fact that these are the things that are going on at the international level, at the national level, and we need to localize it. So that is where our action comes in.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Miss Uni?
So yeah, I mean, what kind of support for the issues of climate change in heritage sites? So I will just mention about the overall or the wide context of DRR. In 2019, the government of Indonesia has already issued cultural heritage law. So if we're talking about law, so that's the most highest legal product of document, that actually be the reference of all the stakeholders. So those law already mentioned specifically about the preservation and then also the protection of the heritage site, as well in the context of disaster. Besides issuing the cultural heritage law in 2019, in the end of 2021, last year on December, the BNP, with the National Disaster Management Agency, in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and Cultural, because the cultural heritage is under the management of the Ministry of Education, is also developing what they call a guideline for cultural heritage, guideline for disaster risk reduction for the cultural heritage. So in this guideline, there is a very quite information or reference in which the stakeholder can actually use that to do like the risk mapping of the cultural heritage in disaster area, and then also to develop a better planning for infrastructure, resilience, risk finance, investment, and then also to calculate the potential of damages from the disaster that exists in their area. So these two law as well, the guideline, it already shows good commitment from the government, from the national government. But now the homework will be on how to ensuring that these two products can be not just socialized, but can be implemented in the local level, and then can be understood by the all related stakeholder. So it's not just a policy, it's not just a document, but it can put into practice through a real project or real program and activities.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Yuni. Thank you, Dr. Paul, again for the answers. I guess we have a very compact and precise answers for all the questions by our speakers. Okay, now we are moving for our key takeaways sessions. So I will go through from the Dr. Paul presentation first. So basically, from the Dr. Paul presentation, he has highlighted about the elements of the culture and the cultural heritage. So for the culture, we have the elements of lifestyle, ways of life, culture, values, systems, traditional, and belief. And also UNESCO defines culture as the set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or a social group that encompasses not only art and literature, but lifestyle, ways of living together, value system, traditional, and belief. And because of this climate change, and also we can see that during the moving of period of time, the culture has been evolving or eroding. We have different opinions and perspective in terms of how the culture has been moving forward within the times. And then, but we can see that our belief system also has been changed. And then ways of life forces to live or threatened by climate change and make us strive towards sustainable development. We have been trying to find a few approach in order to live within the climate change, and one of it will be the greener approach, ways of life, indigenous knowledge, and traditional practice, the future in the past. But we forget that when we are thinking on how to survive or how to survive within this climate change, we try to find the best way for the future. We forget that actually the past actually already have the knowledge that we can use in order for us to adapt into a sustainable development. So this is what we are trying to dig for the knowledge in order for us to adapt it. And then for the cultural heritage, in its broader sense, both a product and a process which provides societies with a wealth of resources that are inherited from the past, created in the present, and bestowed for the benefit of future generations. However, it always have an issue which is limited to physical heritage, the interpretation, whether it's among the religion, caste, and race, and the ownership of the community state. I believe ownership is the main problem when we talk about the cultural heritage preservation around the world, because I could say that that was among the biggest issues and the main problems in my country itself when we are dealing to conserve or to preserve the cultural heritage. It always have issues with the ownership of the assets of the site, because when the parties have no recognition powers on that particular site, they have no powers to conserve. They have to find the ownerships and everything. So it's always become the hinder to the smooth conservation and preservation process. And then when Dr. also giving the example of the Bella sites, which is the Balanced Technology and Cultural Heritage Satellite Imagery of CBDRM, Participatory and Collective Intelligence. Within that case study of Bella sites, it shows that the heritage sites require the participatory of the community because the site itself belongs to the community, and it also required for the community to learn on the intelligence technology in order for them to participate in the preservation process of the sites. And then the final point will be cultural heritage is not just a monument building, it is a way of life. We need to evolve the culture of resilience, cultural heritage for disaster remediation, not the other way around. Like we say just now, all this time we are thinking about the DRM for the cultural heritage, but actually we can find the answers, or we can adapt the knowledge from the cultural heritage for the DRM itself. So that's part for the Dr. report. Moving to Ms. Yuniati presentation, preserving heritage site against disasters in the cities of the Jakarta. So because Jakarta itself surrounded by 13 rivers, fire, highly populated, and we know that Jakarta is very compact, it's very high densities cities. And then Jakarta also have 168 cultural heritage in various forms, while Jakarta also is considered as a disaster-prone area, especially for the flood. So we can see that the amount of financial loss from the damage. And but however, Senda framework has highlighted that cultural heritage protection is very vital within especially within the climate change, the impact of it. So, however, the disaster risk management for the heritage still facing a challenge for the heritage site, especially where is there no clear SOP in Jakarta, trained officials, but however, universities or the youth and the young professional can be the alternative to come out with the solution or the efforts for these problems. And then Ms. Yuanti also have recommended, which is there are a few recommendations that we can look into it, which is strengthening intersectoral collaboration between different stakeholders, conduct more research on cultural heritage and disaster management, which is, I see that a lot of researcher has been going into this kind of research, have a specific data set related to cultural heritage and disaster risk map, because all I see now, these two set of data is still like have a wall in the middle. It's not yet to be related somewhere around here. Then the capacity building for cultural heritage and disaster risk management stakeholders, and to start digitalizing of cultural heritage, because we say that not by the future. We have to accept that not all cultural heritage can be saved or can be preserved. Maybe digitalization is the way for us to conserve this visualizing for our future generation to have the memories or the knowledge about this. So for both of these presentation, we can say that culture leads us to where we are and what will lead us in the future. Cultural heritage is not just a building, it is a way of life that is passed on from generation to the generation. A culture that fosters sustainable development, fosters resilience, can be built by strengthening intersectoral collaboration between different stakeholders, specific data set, more research and training officials. and also combining technology and cultural heritage. So that's why during the early introduction of this session, I say we will look into two dimensions of the climate change impact, which is from the past and from the present. So this is we as the youth and the young professionals, we have a lot of homeworks to do in terms of doing the research, in terms of coming with the new innovations for a better cultural heritage preservation from the climate change impact. So I guess we are going to reaching to our final session. Now I would like to invite Dr. Rahma to give a closure speech before we end our session for today. Dr. Rahma, the screen is yours. Is Dr. Rahma here? Or maybe because our time is getting jealous with us. So I believe we are already reaching the end of the webinar. But before we leave, I would like to invite everyone to switch on the camera for a very quick photo shoot, assisted by our beloved colleague, Kshitish, or I can also help to snapshot. Okay, I see people are starting to turn on their cameras. Right. So we have, can I just snap the photos, Bang Hanif?
Yeah, sure. Anyone want to turn their camera on before we take the photo? We have from someone that I know first. We have Kaifa here. We have Kunduz. We have Ibu Esti. If you're free, if your camera is working well. Hey, Kunduz.
And Sisifa say she's good there.
Okay. Sisifa, no cam.
No cam.
No cam for Chaka Talk. Okay. But you have a cam for FLL. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can, because the internet.
Okay, Westy. Thank you for confirming.
The speaker.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So,
thank you, Alifa. Thank you, Risma, for turning your camera on.
okay.
I think, Kaan, I think we can take a picture now.
Okay. So we are counting in 1, 2, 3. Okay, perfect. So again, I would like to say thank you to all the speakers and participants for spending your Saturday's time. With that, see you again next time. Stay safe and always siap siaga. Bye and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kaan, for moderating. I'm going to stop recording and also stop the